All right, so you guys have talked about the importance of the quality of the strike of the golf ball. What's really cool with MLM2 Pro is the players can actually see that impact of what's happening with the ball and club. Talk about the importance of actually visualizing that and how players can use that to improve.
Well, I think the thing that's really important, obviously, especially as a club gets more convex or rounded, like a wood, is where you hit it on the middle of the face is huge to what the ball's going to do. So you've got gear effects. If you hit it in the toe, the face is going to open and then the gear effect's going to make it hook. And if you hit it in the heel, the face is going to close and the ball's going to cut. So I think people understanding and seeing the visual of that is really important. And then centeredness of hit is also the single biggest contributor when it comes to like distance. So everyone can swing hard, but you could have two people, one swinging at 120 and one swinging at 114. And the guy swinging or girl swinging at 114 could hit it further if the person at 120 is all over the face. The impact location is huge. So when you have a visual representation of that, that's huge. And then when someone's not quite sure why the ball spun not very much or why it overspun, when you directly correlate to the impact location, now they can see it visually. They're like, oh, okay, I understand that. So to me, that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think when I'm looking at launch monitor technology, when I'm looking at a player, a lot of times you'll see a player not hitting a good shot and you'll look at what their club head speed is and their ball speed is, but you make a change in their golf swing, and as Mark said, they're hitting it more in the center of the face. And so that's what I love about the new Rapsodo is you're actually able to show the student, hey, listen, that one, the ball is being hit off the toe. And so we're looking at how far the golf ball went. All of a sudden, you're hitting the golf ball more in the center of the face. A lot of times with the average golfer, you'll see their club head speed go down maybe 1-2 miles per hour, but they hit it more in the center of the face. So the ball speed jumps 10 to 15 miles per hour, and then all of a sudden they hit it 15, 20 yards further, swinging the golf club slower, but where they're contacting it on the face. And so obviously for the average golfer, the majority of the golfers that we teach slice the golf ball. The visual representation of that to show a player, listen, visually on video, the club is swinging from outside where the ball is. It's hitting the toes more so, I would say, and I think it's important for a lot of people to see the shorter the club, the more you can square the face. So a lot of players will say, listen, I hit my irons pretty good, my short iron's pretty good. Visually with the new Rapsodo, you say, yeah, because the club is shorter, so you're catching that more in the center of the face, even though you might be swinging a little bit from out to in. But as the club gets exponentially longer as you go up, now you're hitting the driver, now the path is more left, and now you're catching it off the toe. So it's been really helpful for me with students just to have them say, oh, I didn't realize that when I come into impact, I'm hitting it in that position. And then we're able to say to your driver, okay, well, let's look at the bottom of your driver. That's why all the T marks are like a diagonal line from the toe down to this way, because that's how you're striking it. I think golfers in general learn visually. They're incredibly visual people. So if you can show somebody visually what they're doing, the learning curve gets shortened quite quickly because they don't know that they're doing that. Most of recreational golfers really don't have an understanding as to what they're doing, and they don't really have an understanding as to what actually makes a golf ball go in the air, what doesn't make a golf ball go in the air, what makes a golf ball curve one direction, what makes it. So if you can have a visual representation of that for a student, it's massively important because they're like, oh, okay, that's why I'm hitting it weak, high, with a lot of spin. Yeah, you're catching it off the toe, you're catching it off the heel, and then when you hit one in the center of the face, it goes further. So if you can have the visual and then match the visual to what the numbers are saying, I think it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's the number one thing that our members coming in here, hitting balls, that's the first thing they'll say. They're just like, oh my, I had no idea I was hitting it there. Yeah. And it's a lot of people hitting on the heel, but some people hitting on the toe, and yeah, they're just in shock. They've never had a visual representation of that. And without that feedback, a lot of people, I'll ask, where do you think that one hit on the club? And they'll guess toe, but it'll be a hosel. It'll be a shank. And imagine if you think you've hit it on the toe, and so your next adjustment from that feedback that you think is accurate is going to be to swing further out. You're just going to hit it more on the heel. So yeah, it's really valuable. I think that's probably the biggest thing we see at the club here is people coming in, seeing where the ball's hitting on the face and going, dude, I know what adjustment to make now.
And a guy like Dustin Johnson, a lot of people think DJ, doesn't have a high IQ. DJ probably has one of the highest golf IQs of anybody I've been around. When he's hitting a driver and he's looking at launch monitor technology, he will say, that's off the bottom and it's going to spin at this. That was a little off the top of the face and that's going to spin at that. That was off the toe, the number. And he's normally within 10 to 20 RPMs of what the spin is. I mean, he can, with a driver, he can call out what the spin is based off of where he's catching it on the face of the driver. So I think the thing that I've noticed massively with the new Rapsodo is the ability to show a higher handicap golfer, specifically if they're slicing it, how much they're swinging across it visually, and seeing how much that's affecting, as Mark said, the gear effect of where they're catching it on the face of the golf club. It seems, obviously the golf ball goes further if you hit it in the center of the face. I mean, why didn't I think of that, right? Everybody thinks they know that, but then if you could give them the visual of saying, okay, this one went this far, and the next one went 15 yards further because see how the first one, the face is wide open and you're catching it off the toe of the golf club. The next one, the path isn't so far and you're catching it more in the center of the face. And then if we're able to say, okay, the one that you hit off the toe and you're cutting across it went this far. The one where you're trying to swing a little bit more into out, you're catching it in the center of the face. That one went that far. The average golfer, I think, can touch and feel that. They can put their arms around those numbers. And it doesn't, I think, a lot of people are scared with numbers, right? They don't know what they're looking at. And so I think if you can use a launch monitor to look at specific things, it really can affect change in a very, very massive way, but also in a very, very time condensed way. You can affect change quite quickly by just saying to somebody, listen, you hit your 9-iron solid because you catch it in the middle of the face all the time. You don't hit your driver solid because you're constantly swinging across it and you're catching it off the toe. And if you do that enough, you're still going to swing across it and then you're going to shut the face down and then you're going to catch it off the heel.
So I love that visual part. You see it, you can see the metrics of what's going on. But if players look and it's like, okay, it's hitting it off the toe or it's off the heel, what should they do next? Is it a ball position thing? Is it a alignment? Is it swing path? What normally is the cause?
I think it can be a number of things. I mean, I think it can be set up. I think the first thing, most golfers are predisposed. The Control-Alt-Delete for most golfers is its technique, right? My technique is bad. Sometime it can be something, I would say, and I think Mark would agree with me, I think the majority of the changes that we're making at the tour level, half of it, in my case, with the two guys I work with, Brooks and DJ, because they have so much speed, because they have so much clubhead speed, and because they have so much ball speed, if their setup, posture, grip, and alignment, all of the stuff that they're doing before they hit the golf ball, if those basics get off, because they have so much speed, they can hit the golf ball miles offline. And sometimes it can be, hey, you're just a little too far away from the golf ball, get a little bit closer. Hey, the ball position's a little bit too far back, just move it a little bit more forward. So I think you always want to go as a player to the things that you can control, because it's hard halfway down on your downswing if you feel like you're over the top to let go of the golf club. Tiger was great at that, but the rest of us can't do that. So wouldn't you agree? We're making a lot of tweaks. So I always look at the setup, the grip, the posture, and alignment. It's a little bit like getting into a car, right? If you're getting into a brand new Ferrari and they're going to close a freeway and you can drive it as fast as you want, and you're 6'2" tall, but the person driving the car before you was 5 feet tall, and you can't change where the mirrors are and you can't change the setup of the experience is going to be very different. So controlling the things that you can control before you make a golf swing, to me, those are the easiest gains to make.
Yeah, for sure. The static stuff is very easy. And then the other thing is, if you look at the best players and you went down the range here at the US Open, not everybody lines it up in the middle of the face. So some guys that move the club more outside in are going to line the ball in a different position to guys who move the club inside out. And so that's always one of the things where you see players, like if they know they stay in their posture and move this way a lot, they'll line the ball up in the heel so they can make it in the center of the face. Vice versa if they swing a lot inside out. So I think one of the things that people don't realize is that they're making those adjustments as opposed to changing their swing. To Claude's point, like you're set up, you're establishing those things before you ever move the club so that now you're able to do the same thing every time. And I think for the average golfer, with the technology, they'll be able to now, okay, well, let me see, before I change my golf swing, let me see if I line it up in the heel, do I hit it in the middle? Oh, I do. Well, let me see if I can do that again. I do. Let me see if okay, well, maybe that's the easy solution.
If I move the golf ball more forward, I think one of the generalizations that Mark and I see, and Sam is on a regular basis, with the driver, most people have a driver swing with their irons and an iron swing with their drivers. They're hitting down on their driver and they're hitting up on their irons, right? So they're trying to lift the irons into the air and they're trying to get power with the driver, so they're hitting it down. And I think, it's a generalization, but I think the majority of the average golfers that I see, their irons are too far forward in their stance, and with the driver, it's too far back, right? So that massively affects your setup. And so if you can make small incremental changes and then use the new Rapsodo to say, okay, I've moved the golf ball more up with my driver, right? Now I'm not hitting down on it as much. So now I can see that the club looks in a different position at the moment of contact, how it's coming into the ball. So there are a lot of tweaks that you can make before you ever hit the golf ball. Unfortunately, those aren't the things that are really sexy, right? Nobody's making Instagram videos about ball position, right? Nobody's making Instagram videos about shoulder alignment right? They're making it about all of these other cool, fancy things. But always go to the things, like Mark said, the static things that you are doing before you ever move the golf club. If those can be consistent, and if you can be really, really hyper diligent on doing the same thing every time. Mark will tell you, there are players that have ball positions and setups that are all over the place. You can play from that if you do it every single time. If you have a repeatable, not every setup on the PGA, there are guys on the PGA Tour that are closed and open with their shoulders. There are guys that are open with their feet and closed with their shoulders. There are a gamut across the board of a lot of different setups. I think it's really important for everyone listening. You need to figure out what you do as a player. What is your internal swing DNA? Every single player that I work with has their own swing signature, their own DNA, and that varies across the board. And so a lot of times what Mark and I are doing, saying to a player, no, you don't have to change any of this. Let's embrace what you do from a setup standpoint, but because what you do from a setup standpoint, we're going to have to do some things in the golf swing, or some of the things that you do in the golf swing, as Mark was saying earlier, I think he said this perfectly, part of what you're doing in the golf swing is because of the way you set up to the golf ball. Right. So it's not a surprise that you're doing what you're doing in your golf swing based off of what you're presenting before you hit the golf ball.
For sure. And I think you'd probably attest to this, Sam, here. When you're dealing with the average golfer, you have to remember the best players are also the best compensators, and their hands are incredible. So they are able to do things in this interval of a golf swing that the club golfer just can't dream about doing. And the more that you get into the golf swing, to Claude's point, the stuff that people put on Instagram that's sexy, the downswing takes basically a quarter of the time of the backswing, right? So you have no time, and you don't have any time in a golf swing because it's less around a second. So now when you start to break that down, is you better do whatever you're doing either at address or as the club's moving the slowest. But as soon as that thing changes direction, it's really hard. And the worse the player, the harder it is. So it's one of those things where the more you can do for the club golfer to get them ready before they ever move the club, and then maybe in their takeaway and something in their backswing, they have a chance. But they don't have the dexterity or the athleticism most of the time to be able to compensate in the downswing. So you got to stack the deck, I call it, on the front end to help them. And I think the technology allows you to actually be able to see that, the visual representation, and then be able to, more importantly, practice that and understand it, especially if you've got a sim, you're like, okay, so if I do that, the golf ball does this. Oh, and then visually I can see what the club is doing as it's coming into impact. Those, to Claude's point, are all massively helpful in expediting the learning curve. I think technology makes learning easier for the student. More than anything, it's for them.
It's not for us. I mean, the technology that we're looking at, I know what a golf, I mean, I've been doing this, Mark, we've been doing this for so long. You know, we've seen thousands upon thousands of golf swings over time. You know, I've been teaching for 20 years. You know, I've seen good players, bad players. I think if you can use technology to show a player, listen, we have made a change. And we can show you this from a number standpoint. The change was audio. The shot sounded different. The flight was different. The contact was different. So the things that we all can see and feel with our senses, touch, smell, all of those things, oh, that sounded different. Okay, if I can show, okay, now the visual representation of how your golf club's working into the golf ball, see where it was 5 swings ago where the ball is not going very far and it's not solid and stuff and it's moving. Oh, okay. Now you just hit the one that you've just hit out of the last 20 golf balls the furthest, and now see the club working it. Then they can see it. And you're always looking as an instructor for that eureka moment for the student to get it. Like that's the joy in instruction and coaching for me, is when you're working on something that is complex. It, like Mark said, it's a second to a second and a half. It's a very condensed, very short period of time to affect a lot of changes. But when you're working with a student, and if you can use technology to say to somebody, listen, I know this seems incredibly complex and different, it's really, really not. You know, my dad used to say this, my grandfather used to say this, golf is a very, very simple game that tends to confuse smart people. They think there are these million different things that are going on, and a lot of times, one of the ways that we can affect change very, very quickly is a lot of higher handicap golfers have something extreme in their setup, from a grip, from a posture, from alignment, from ball position. It's so extreme that there's just no way to recover from that. The tour player is like a Formula One race car driver. Regardless of what the car setup is, they can still kind of drive the car because they're a race car driver, right? If you've got the fastest car and you're a good race car driver, you're going to be able to drive it the fastest. Tour players are race car drivers. They can do whatever you ask them to do. The rest of us are just trying to hit the golf ball solid. And if we can use technology and use visual parts of technology to help us, I think it makes a massive difference. And all we're trying to do as instructors and coaches is, like Mark said, we're trying to condense the learning curve, expedite it faster.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the single most important thing that technology allows the higher average handicap player to do, is if they use technology effectively, they can really, really make changes quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. With the Rapsodo now too, the MLM2 Pro, we have spin with the RPT balls.
It's great.
What are players looking at when they're looking at spin numbers? How should they view that data?
Well, with drivers, high launch, low spin. Right, the holy grail of driver technology and driver fitting.
So when you say high launch, low spin, what
so
are
you're
some
trying to launch
specific...
the golf ball as high as you can and spin it the least. The average golfer launches their driver low and spins it very, very high.
What would be a high spinning driver?
38, 3900,
Okay.
but club golfers might spin them at 4500.
I mean, what's Max want to spin his driver? What's
20, like somewhere around, he likes a little more spin, so he's okay with 25, 26. It depends now. If he's going to hit a like knuckled one, it's probably he'd like to be spinning it low 2000s. So
What's
like,
too low?
well, once you, okay, so too low depends on the launch.
Yes.
Like, so if you can launch it high enough, you can spin it low. But if you can't, you know, you could launch it 17 degrees and spin it 1700. If you've got enough speed, it'll stay in the air.
But it
That's
won't.
what
If
long
you don't have
drive.
speed,
but
it won't stay in the
But
air.
you don't have speed, the ball's just going to drop out of the sky. So the problem is club golfers need to be really, really careful because they're looking at the spin numbers of guys that have ball speeds that are in excess of 170 miles an hour. You know, that's low on the PGA Tour and that's extremely high for a club golfer. the long hitters on the PGA Tour, their ball speed, Claude's guys that smash it, they're in the mid 180s. They can get it in the 190s. That's a totally different animal.
Yeah,
See,
DJ's looking for his driver at 180 plus ball speed. He optimum for the guys at TaylorMade and Keith Sabarbaro, one of the best, equipment guys on the planet. They're looking to spin this thing. I mean, he's okay if it's 1800, but his sweet spot's right around 21 to 2200. Anything over that, the ball starts to really.
At what launch angle is he trying to hit at that 2000-ish?
Brooks is more down on it than DJ. DJ can launch it at 12. Brooks launches it a little. Brooks hits down on it more than DJ does. DJ kind of hits flat on it. When Brooks plays his best, he's probably hitting 1 to 1.5 degrees down on it.
But he's got enough speed.
The average golfer, when they hit down on it, a lot of the driver stuff for the average golfer, it's a math issue. It's a math problem, right? And if you can tweak through launch monitor technology and say, okay, we're going to try and make a change here, right? We're going to try and make a change with the way you swing your golf club. And let's go and actually look. To me, that's the power. You can actually go and look at if anything you're trying to work on with a player is actually changing what their ball flight is doing. Is their ball flight getting any better? Is their spin getting any better? Is their launch getting any better? Are they hitting the golf ball any further? So, okay, that didn't make a change. Okay, let's try something else. But I think when we're looking at, and I think that's a huge thing with the new Rapsodo, having the opportunity with the golf balls to calculate spin, that's huge. And then wedges. Obviously with lob wedges, the average golfer is spinning their lob wedge low, where the average, they're
spinning like today, you measure on the course and they're spinning wedges in a 10 to 11,000. But I think that the interesting part is the math is completely inverse for a wedge. Yeah. So for a wedge, it's the lower the launch, the higher the spin you create. Yeah. So it's a different animal. So now you've got one over here where you want low spin and high launch, and then down here on the other end of the table, you want the low launch produces a high spin. Now, one thing I will say, the club golfer is way better spending their time on trying to figure out how to have lower launch and higher spin, even if it means them deferring instead of hitting a lob wedge, not even having it in the bag, having a sand wedge, because they're going to have such a high distribution of shots from inside 140 yards to be trying to make bogeys or pars. They need to practice that. And then the ability of them to be able to measure their spin. Okay, if I move the ball back, if I lean the shaft, things that are very inverse from what you would do with a driver, that's going to help them be a better wedge player and actually probably help them be a better ball striker with their irons overall. Those are the things that you can measure. And that's the whole part about golf. There's games within the game. If you look, the best drivers generally aren't the best wedge players. Yeah. And the guys who are great wedge players sometimes are crooked off the tee. So it's trying to figure that balance out, and then where are you willing to give it up to help you be a better player. There's all this talk about strokes gained driving. It's all distance bias. Well, it's great, but if you can't keep it in play, it doesn't really do you any good. So it's like maybe I come down on the distance and I'm going to focus on the wedges. But to me, the technology and measuring spin and measuring land angle, so launch and land are huge with a wedge. You want it to launch right, but lower, sort of under 30 degrees with a lob wedge.
Why under 30? We polled our users on social media, and majority of them said the optimal launch angle with a wedge is over 30. Why should it be under 30 degrees?
Because if you look at the spin loft mountain, if you get into angle of attack and dynamic loft and the spin loft, your math works better when you've got a lower launching shot, which is going to, the spin mount number is better, you produce more backspin. And then there's a point where it becomes, you lose spin, right? So with the driver, you'd want low spin loft. So you've got shallow angle of attack and loads of shaft lean, and the ball, Dustin does that, and then he launches the thing up in the air and the thing goes forever. That's how he gets his like 1800 spin. But as the club gets shorter, you're trying to change that relationship. So wedges under 30, you're going to produce more spin because of the spin loft gets into be a really good number, and it's predictable.
And I think for the average golfer, a lot of them with the wedges, they're hitting it off the back foot. Their impact conditions aren't great. So it's not surprising that they would say, yeah, we would like to launch that higher because that's what they're doing.
And they probably think that they're going to stop the ball with land angle, but you actually get when it launches lower, you get this land angle that drops like this versus this. And then the other part, remember, very rarely do we play golf in an environment like this where there's no wind.
Exactly.
As soon as you get wind and the elements get up, hitting a wedge that just stands up and does this is completely pointless. It doesn't work. Whereas lower launching, it's very durable in a variety of conditions. The ball's still going to react the same. And they want a ball that lands on the green, good players, good wedge players that goes, they don't want a ball that goes, they don't want that. Because the contouring and the sloping of greens and agronomy these days is the ball, you can't stop it. Yeah. So you're looking again for that predictability. But club golfers would get so much better because if they were better with a wedge and they could actually just put it on the green and it would be the same every time. Now all of a sudden that's going to be a much bigger contributor to their scoring being lower.
So you talk about the launch angle, the spin, descent angle, or the land angle. What are those numbers you're looking for? So sub 30 with the launch angle. What about the spin and the descent angle would be good numbers?
So anything over 10,000.
Okay.
I mean, when you start to get on short shots, inside, say, 10, 15 yards, you would go more on a ratio of like the best pitchers, chippers are spinning at about 400 RPMs a yard. That's a lot of spin. And then as it gets further away, that ratio changes a little bit, but then you want total spin on distance wedges. So the more spin you can produce, assuming the launch conditions are optimum, you're just going to get more control, right? So that's something that's in the 10,000s is what you're going to see with a lob wedge, and then it's probably going to go down a little bit. Again, it just depends. Some players have the ability to produce more spin than others. So you just got to figure out, Claude said it really well, what you do. But then can you do it consistently? That's the part. So you have to be really careful. Remember, tour players are using premium new balls. Most of them, when they make a birdie, they get rid of it. So there's a brand new ball coming in probably every 3 holes, which makes a big difference. They change their wedges. Titleists say after 750 strikes, you lose 20% of your spin and decay on a wedge. So they're changing wedges frequently. So now they're using new golf balls, premium golf balls, and they're using new grooves.
Some guys are switching wedges 3 times a year. The average golfer just doesn't have the ability to do that.
So those are some things where that's going to affect your ability to produce a lot of spin. So those are things you should look at, but you get that land angle being steep, 50, something like that, above 50, you know, now the ball's got some stopping power. And what's incredible is not just with wedges, but the best players, they're landing long irons like that. So again, these devices allow you to do that. But if you're trying to be a good wedge player, you can use the rationale of low launch, high spin, and with a driver, it's high launch, low spin. And then back to our conversation, the better your setup, ball further back, shaft forward, to Claude's point, you can facilitate more with a wedge that's set up. And then with the driver, it's the same. You get the ball up in the stance, you get your setup, tilts right, you've got more chance of hitting up on it. And one of the things I think we probably both agree on is you want to favor fading a driver. It's going to help you produce a little bit more of a consistent shot pattern just because you got less loft. Loft is your friend when it comes to hitting the ball straight, which is why, back to our conversation on people can hit 9 irons pretty straight. Driver, 3 irons, fairway woods, they got less loft, they just get a little bit harder to manage.
And when we were talking about wedges, one of the things that I think that everybody loves to watch when we go to tournaments, everybody loves to watch tour players spin wedges, right? And everybody always says, why can't I spin my wedges? Why can't I spin my 8 iron and my 9 iron? The answer to that is there's just not enough speed. Right? They don't have enough speed in their golf swing. So again, using the technology to say, okay, a lot of players struggle with their wedges, and I think Mark would agree with this. They make too long of a golf swing for the distance they're trying to hit. So the golf swing, let's say they're trying to hit it 75 yards, they're making a golf swing that they could use with their driver. So then they have to slow down, so then the contact gets bad. So again, what I'm always trying to do is say to myself, okay, I've got all these numbers that Rapsodo told me, what changes can I make in setup, ball position, the static things before they hit it? And then how can I have the body and what they're doing with their movement pattern change the numbers? I think what everybody does is when they look at the numbers, they say, okay, I just want to change the numbers. I'm always saying, okay, how can we change this? How can we get you more spin with your lob wedge? How can we change the angle of attack? How can we change the launch? What are some things that we can do physically from a technique standpoint that are going to go over and change the numbers, as opposed to just going, okay, that was at 10,000, I'm going to try and get less. Or that wasn't enough, I'm going to try. Having an idea of saying, okay, what are the things that we can do as a player and as an instructor and as a coach? How can we do things, technique, movement, body-wise, to then change these numbers? And I think it's important, specifically, we've been talking a lot tonight about wedges. Get a baseline with your wedges. Figure out how far your 60 degree goes. Figure out how far your 56 goes. Figure whatever it is. But get it and say, okay, give yourself a 10, 20 ball challenge and say, okay, I'm gonna hit 20 balls with this. I'm gonna look at the numbers on Rapsodo and say, okay, and it's gonna give me an average, okay? And then do that again. And do it maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 times. If you do that, if the average is the same, then that's who you are. What everybody does with technology and numbers-wise is when they look at the numbers, they say, okay, how can I change the numbers? And what Mark, he said something I thought was really good earlier. It's about doing the same thing every time. So if your average with your lob wedge is X, okay, do that 50 times in a row. So let's say your lob wedge goes 85 yards. That's your average. Okay, hit me 20, use the technology to say, go, hit me 20 shots and carry it 85 yards. And do the same thing over and 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 again. And that's what the best players in the world do. They're very believe it or not, they're very boring golfers because they just basically are trying to do the same thing every single day. Yeah. That's all they're trying to do. The average golfer is doing something different every single day.
There's some really cool numbers that you can use on the Rapsodo that are just like good baseline numbers that you can correlate to the club you're using. So like if you've got a 60 degree wedge, just like a neat number that's pretty good is like half the loft on the club would be a pretty good launch angle. So like 60 degree wedge, if you launch it around 30, that's not a bad launch angle.
That's great.
It's a good rule of thumb, and you can use that all the way down to like 6 iron. So like if you've got let's say your pitching wedge is 42 degrees or something like that, which is like what most of these like new club makers are making them. So if you're around 42 degrees, your launch angle optimum might be around 21. So we see most people come in and they hit, and it's like 27 degree launch angle with a pitching wedge. I'll measure it on the Liloft machine, and I'll say, hey, this is a 22 degree club. It should be launching at it's a 42 degree club. It should be launching at about 21. And then they'll say, well, how do I do that? It's like, well, okay, look at what the club must look like at impact if you're launching it that high. How should it look if you want to launch it at 21? And then just use the feedback. You know, they'll set up, and you'll see them kind of lean a little bit more on their left foot, lean their hands a little bit more forward.
So the technique changes the numbers.
Based on, like, they've got, okay, now they know that number needs to be this, and it's too high. What can I do? What can I sense, to your point? What can I feel to get that launch angle lower? And I think that's, like you were saying earlier, the feedback, the more feedback, the better, right? Like if we know what we're looking at, if we've got those baseline numbers, then every single shot we can be making some little micro adjustment to improve those numbers or get them where we want them.
What should players be looking at with spin axis? So I feel like a lot of times, my buddies, I'm talking to them, they just want to hit the ball straight, which is, the hardest thing to do in the game.
It's a pipe dream.
Yeah, hardest thing to do in the game. So if you're looking at spin axis and you got a player like Max who wants to fade the ball, so positive spin axis.
Yeah.
Is he looking at a certain range for his shots? Is he trying to repeat a certain number? What is your?
I would say so. Your face-to-path relationship is going to give you your spin axis, and just very simply put, once the spin axis starts to get over 5 or 6 with the driver, you got a lot of curve. And if you start to get a lot of curve and you play golf in crosswinds, and golf balls now don't spin very much, so now you've got high launch, low spin, and you've got some spin axis, face-to-path a little off, that ball's going sideways. So it's one of those things where if you can minimize the spin axis to a point where there's not much of it, there's some shape to the ball, but it's going to obviously hold its line and it's going to be pretty good. I would say you can use spin axis to practice shots when you're in trouble. Now remember, when you're in the trees, you might want to hook it a lot, or you might want to slice it out. Those are some of the things that are really fun with simulation, is you can start figuring out, how do I curve the ball a lot? And then you can often reverse engineer actually hitting pretty straight shots from hitting big curves. So, okay, I'm not trying to hook it a lot, I'm trying to hook it a little bit, I'm trying to draw it. Okay, what do I need to do to make those adjustments? So like spin axis, I tell everybody, assuming you've hit it in the middle of the face, back to our conversation on gear effect, as soon as you start, if you hit a ball in the toe, you might get a 21 to 22 negative spin axis, but the face is going to read open. It's like, well, the average person is going to look at that and be completely freaked out. Well, that's because you didn't make the shot, the ball do that. The technology did, you hit it offline. So again, spin axis is, did you hit it in the middle of the face? How much do you want the ball to curve? Like, simplify it. Don't start to get a big number. If you get a number over 5 on spin axis, especially as you're decreasing in loft, going sideways. Yeah, I think it's one of those things. I would be aware of it. Obviously, if you're a right-handed golfer, positive spin axis, your ball's going to cut, fade to the right. Negative, it's going to the left. So you simplify it. Try not to overthink it too much. And whenever you're looking at face to path, 2 to 1 is a pretty good number. Whether the path is 4 or the path is 2, you'd want the face to be about half of that. The bigger the path number, the more propensity the ball's to curve, you're going to have a higher spin axis number.
And I think when you're looking at, the spin axis and the positive versus the negative, right? Whatever shape you've got, you could just basically dumb it down and say, okay, all my bad shots are positive spin axis is going that way. All right, let me try and give myself a 10-ball challenge. The only goal on this is to change that from positive to negative. That's it. Doesn't matter the outcome, doesn't matter where the golf ball's going. There isn't a wrong answer. It's just the only right answer is it's no longer going this way, and I want to get it to go that way. And I think sometimes just those simple things can make a difficult concept easy to understand, right? Oh, okay, if it's going a lot this way, that's where my miss goes. See if I can hit some that get it to go that way. If I get it to go that way and I overdo it, then I can manage that. Most golfers have something in their golf swing, setup, posture, grip, posture, alignment, all those things, down to, they have one major thing that's really, really extreme in their golf swing that they just don't have the athletic and golf ability to recover from. And then you look at how much that dramatically makes the golf ball curve and makes the numbers look like they look. I always just try and say, whatever the number is that I'm looking at, and I think you said this, how about we cut that in half, right? Just cut it in half. We don't need to make, so if someone's super down and left, right, their path is left and it's causing the golf ball to spin a lot and they're hitting big, big cuts and they're super over the top and slicey, and the holy grail is to get them to draw it. That's going to be very difficult to do. So taking a number of looking at what the club is doing or the ball is doing and saying, okay, let's just take that extreme number and cut it in half. And if we cut it in half, then it becomes a lot more manageable. And then we can start to make small tweaks to it.
Right? It's crazy. Like, if you swing that much out to in, and you've been swinging that much out to in for like 5,000 of your last 5,000 shots, your setup reflects that path because you've learned to hit the ball with that path. If you make an in to out swing, you're going to miss the ball entirely.
Without changing a lot of things.
You can't even make that change without doing this kind of like piece by piece by piece, getting a sense for a little bit less out to in, a little bit less out to in. And then eventually your body's going to make the adjustments it needs to make to be set up to swing in to out. But yeah, it is like, if you start there, it's gonna take some work to cut that in half and cut it in half again and cut it in half again.
I think if you can just try and get something to where whatever number you're looking at, if it's an extreme number, as opposed to trying to make it
the other way, just
non-extreme anymore, just make it less extreme and then it becomes more manageable. And if you can get to where you can manage what your golf swing is doing, right? Just, okay, you don't hit every shot perfect, but the miss is a little bit less extreme. The bad shot is a little bit less extreme. And then maybe you're not hitting it perfect, but what you're not doing anymore is making big catastrophic fails, which dramatically affect where the golf ball goes.
So the golf ball, it's a hot topic this year. What are your guys' thoughts on kind of what should happen with the golf ball?
I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say.
I wouldn't have a problem if there were rules for the tour and everybody else, because the game, and it's not to sound disrespectful or arrogant, the game that is played at the elite tour level doesn't resemble anything like the recreational game. It just doesn't. And so, I mean, I don't see, and I don't think you do, I don't see if it was, I've always said if it was just technology, if it was just the golf ball, and if it was just the equipment, right? So there's this sense that equipment, golf balls and golf clubs, are the problem. If that was the case, I should be able to pick up Brooks's driver and his ball and carry it 310, 320 like he does. I should be able to pick up Rory McIlroy's driver and his ball if it was just the technology. So if it was just the technology, everybody across the boards, from the Champs Tour to the main tour to the ladies tour, everybody would hit the golf ball the exact same distance. And I think one of the things that we've learned is there is an art and skill to hitting the golf ball further. Padraig Harrington has figured that out, right? There are players that have figured that out, because now, if you're DJ and you're 6'4" and you're hypermobile and you are a multi-sport athlete growing up and you could do anything, and he's built for golf, long arms, long legs, massively flexible, it's easy for him. So technology massively helps him. But I don't see the average golfer getting any the regular lessons that you and I still give to 15, 20 handicappers, I don't hear those people saying, man, I hit my driver 30 yards further than I used to because of the golf ball.
No, I think that the athlete's a different animal. The things that we've learned in 20 years of teaching and coaching is we train the juniors and the athletes we have now first off, we call them athletes, way differently than we did 20 years ago, right? Typically, 20 years ago, the kids that come to play golf, they've tried every other sport and they're not very athletic. Now, you have kids that are really fit and they want to play and they know how to generate speed. I think that, to me, there's not enough acknowledgement of the golfers are athletes, they train really hard and they work really hard. I like the fact that golf is... You've got this affinity between club golfer and the best players. There's a huge contrast. They're not, I agree with Claude, they're not the same, but you can go play the same golf course with the same equipment, and that gives you this aspirational sort of idea of how good they really are and how they don't play the same game as you because you have all the same ingredients they do, essentially equipment-wise, but you can't do what they do. I think that's pretty cool, and that makes golf great. I think that perhaps we could look at mechanisms to curtail players from an agronomy standpoint, because that's not even talked about. Like course conditions, that's what really separates.
Yeah, my dad talks about that a lot. When he played the tour in the late 60s and early 70s, he always says one of the biggest changes between when he played and the players that play today is the golf courses. I mean, if you look at the Augusta effect of golf courses, everyone is trying to have greens like Augusta National. So if you look at how fast, my dad always says that, the greens when he played, even in majors, weren't anything close to the way they are now. He said you'd maybe play one golf tournament a year that had really, really fast greens, but the rest of them weren't. So agronomy has played a massive, massive role in what people think from a distance standpoint. My issue is I just don't want to be a part of a sport that's constantly looking backwards. Oh, the players today hit it too far, and there's all these, a lot of people say there's all these golf courses that are obsolete. And you're like, well, when was this golf course built? Well, it was built in 1904. Well, pretty much everything built in 1904 is obsolete in 2023. But I'll never forget, I was talking to Ben Crenshaw once, and I was living in Austin, Texas, and there was a new club that had just been built. I think it was called Spanish Oaks, and the guy said to Ben, have you played it yet? And he said, no, I haven't, I want to get over there. And he said, I played it. And he said, well, Ben said, what did you think? And he said, yeah, I mean, it was really good, but the tour guys would just crush it. And Ben Crenshaw, I'll never forget this, he said, Do you realize that less than 0.1% of golf courses all over the planet will ever host a PGA Tour event? Right? Yeah. So what the tour does and the way the tour plays is very different than everybody else. And I think limiting the ball for the recreational golfer, they need to hit it further. Technology should help them. And I want technology to continue to help. But at the tour level, Max Verstappen is the best driver currently in Formula One, and he also has the fastest car. You give the best athletes in the world the best tools, whatever they are, they're going to perform at a high level. And like I said, I can't take Roger Federer's tennis racket and ball and do the things that he does with it, because he is a very, very special individual athlete. And I think that, yeah, a lot of players hit the golf ball a long way. But also, I mean, if you look at a guy like Nick Faldo was as tall, if not taller than Dustin Johnson. He's a big guy. And he hit the golf ball nowhere because he played in an era to where accuracy was everything. Accuracy used to be everything. I mean, I can even remember when, Tiger started, one of the things that he said was, I no longer want to lead the tour in driving distance. In 2000, and I was sitting with he and my dad over lunch, and he said, I want to lead the tour in fairways hit and greens in regulation. And he was willing to give up the distance element of it to hit more fairways and to hit more greens. And there are a lot of really, really long hitters on the PGA Tour, but these guys aren't winning 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year. Some of the longest hitters on the PGA Tour are not winning at all. So, and there are still great players that aren't necessarily the longest. And I think that's what makes our sport great. Because if it was just the bombers, then the same 3, 4 players would win every tournament. And we don't. We get a myriad. Chris Kirk won a golf tournament this year on the PGA Tour. How about how much further Jon Rahm hits it than Chris Kirk? A long way. Scotty Scheffler hits it much further than a guy like Chris Kirk does. But Chris Kirk can still win on a very difficult golf course that is incredibly long and very difficult. And I think to me, it's a simplistic view that the golf ball goes too far. You give great athletes great equipment, and you give great athletes, you tell tennis players they don't need to serve and volley anymore, and they just need to basically have massive ground strokes and a big serve. Why would they do anything else? If you're a young golfer, why wouldn't you try and hit the golf ball 350 if you can? Because the technology will help you. And if you get in shape and you learn and go to people that can teach you how to do that, why would you go, no, I'm going to hit it 280 and become a great wedge player? You become a great wedge player after you hit it 380.
I think the other thing is that until the golf courses are set up to handcuff the players will continue to play the game the way they're playing it. But nobody's figured that out. You look at certain golf courses, like a prime example would be if you go play Innisbrook, Copperhead. Distance is taken away from those players because of the way the golf course is set up.
It's set up like, they always say, it's set up like an old school US Open golf course. Hilly, narrow fairways, tons of rough. So the bombers, I mean, you look who wins around there, Jordan, Adam Hadwin, it's not guys that are just prolific. Yeah, Sam Burns hits it a long way, but he's also a great iron player too. You got to hit it straight. So I think that's the other part that you'll start to see, and it's all about course setup. So the golf ball it may be a short-sighted, quick approach. I don't think it's a great one. I think there's a lot more thought and probably needs to go into it. I don't think it'll happen. I don't think it'll get adopted at the tour level either, because people want to see people hit the ball a long way. They want to see them make a lot of birdies, and I think that there's also the chance that guys that don't have speed, we talked about this, there's no substitute for it. If you don't have speed and they roll the golf ball back, there's going to be a lot of people out of a job, because it will have more of an effect on the slower guys than the long guys, because guess what? The long guys are still going to be the long guys.
Yeah, and it's not just off the tee. If you are a shorter hitter and you hit your driver a little shorter because this ball's not going quite as far, you've got a longer club in that Correct. You also hit shorter.
There's a knock-on effect of it all.
Yeah.
And we were all joking at Augusta this year on that Saturday morning where everybody had to go out and finish, and it was super, super cold, and it was raining, and nobody could get around the corner at 18, and the balls weren't going anywhere. We were all joking afterwards, if anybody wants to know what the ball back would look like, that's what it would look like. I mean, I think Sung Jae Im hit a drive. Sung Jae's not short, and he couldn't even get around the corner. He couldn't get to the green. And it's not like he hits it nowhere, but it's uphill, it's cold. So that morning, guys were coming in, all the players everybody was talking about, man, the ball was going nowhere out there, and I hit it. And guys were saying, what'd you hit into this hole? And they were going, no way. Because the following day, you were probably hitting one club less. So
yeah, Justin Thomas was hitting 3-wood into 18. He barely got it up in the fairway, and he's hitting it having 3-wood just to get it on the green. And so it's like, if you imagine you roll the golf ball back, and then they got to go play that golf course. To Claude's point, I mean, it is the Augusta effect. Now that golf course is probably not playable, but for about 10 to 15 guys in the field.
You know what I just thought of? If they did roll the ball back, right? And so if they roll the ball back, they're not going to not play the golf courses at the distance that they've been playing them at, right? So they've changed all these golf courses to modernize them. So now they're going to play from all the way back with different golf balls. There are fairways that half the tour won't get to.
Correct.
Wild.
So it's one of those, I don't think it's going to happen, but again, crazier things have happened.
Yeah, it's been a crazy year. What about, I have three young boys. How do you guys suggest getting kids started into the game, whether it's a young boy or somebody that's, in high school and wants to pick up the game? How do you get introduced to golf?
Claude, probably the best one to tell that because he's got a few generations of it.
Listen, golf, first of all, needs to be fun for kids. And I think historically, golf lessons have been boring and kind of draconian and it feels like you're going to school. And I think the work that the guys at the Titleist Performance Institute have done, their TPI junior program, in the way that they teach kids to use other, you go to a TPI junior program and you've got kids that have never played golf before and they set up their junior golf combine and they're punching, kicking, throwing, jumping, rolling. They're throwing a ball, they're hitting a ball, they're punching a bag, and they're doing all this, and they do that for 40 minutes. In the last 20 minutes, you say, okay, remember what you were doing with the tennis racket, how your weight went to this foot and your weight went to that foot. Now do the same thing with a golf swing, and you go back and forth between other sports. With kids, I don't care how they grip the golf club. Just get them to swing it as hard as possible. No, but seriously, get them to swing it as hard as possible, because the junior that is really tough for Mark and I to teach and help get better is the 13-year-old junior whose mother and father pulled them out of every sport by the time they were 8. So the only thing they've done for the last X amount of years is just golf. They don't play team sports, they're not coachable, and they're not really very athletic, right? So that is not an athlete. And I think you want to try and we used to say other sports were bad for golf, and now we know how many other sports are great for golf. So keep your kids playing as many sports as possible and show them, hey, kicking and throwing and punching and all of this stuff and jumping, that's very similar to all the stuff we're going to ask you to do in a golf swing.
Yeah, I think you're going to, I liked what you said about the fun part. I think you have to make them where they don't want to leave the golf course and it's fun, so you just sprinkle it at first. The worst thing you can do is just take them and make them hit balls. Make
sure the grip's in the right place.
Yeah. It doesn't matter if they grip it cross-handed, whatever they do. Have fun, swing with it. Take them, get popcorn, ride around in a golf cart, whatever it is to create a love for the game. And then you want it to be their idea. I think the hardest part is when you try and force kids to do it. My kids have just started kind of showing an interest in golf, but they play other sports and they're into music. They don't even care. My son would be like, hey, I wouldn't mind a golf lesson. So I've never pushed it on them. I'd much rather it be them wanting to do it. And I think if it's fun, that they'll have a good time doing that. And it seems to be socially, golf's pretty good. If you put the people in groups, it does way, way better. That's just social learning for golf, so much better. It's huge.
Especially for girls too.
Yeah.
If you can get girls with their own peer group and get them and feel like they're learning together. But I think we just know more now from a junior development standpoint. We know more about, how kids learn. And one of the great things that they always talk about, at TPI, when I was growing up and you were growing up, I'm in my 50s, as an assistant, you got to teach the juniors. So I didn't know anything, and I was teaching kids that didn't know anything. So it was amateurs teaching amateurs. And I think one of the things that junior development, we know so much more about it now. We know how kids learn, we know how kids develop, and I think it's just, we try and make it as fun as possible. And my dad learned this from my grandfather. We're trying to teach people to play golf, not teach golf to people. And I think historically with juniors, we've gone, this is golf, and you have to do it this way. You have to stand this way, you have to do this, and you're telling a 4-year-old kid how to, interlock his grip, right? That's what we used to do.
And I will say the technology has made golf to where there is more variability in the style and what people are able to do, because the golf clubs and the golf balls will go pretty straight. So I think that's a good thing, and that allows kids to have more fun. And the other thing that you don't really think about is you can go when Claude and I were learning to play golf, he may have been a little different because of the family tree, but like I had cut down clubs that were the wrong weight, they were terrible. You can go get US kids clubs now for someone who's 3 or 4 years old. This thing's perfectly weighted, and it's like the clubs never swing in them. Like when I was a kid, the club was heavier than I was, it's all over the place. So now the technology is such that the kid's got a club that actually, hey, this feels good. I can swing it, I can swing hard, I can grip it how I want. You got a chance. And I think organically you just got to let that develop, as opposed to being stylistic about do this. Just let them have fun with it. Golf's becoming, thankfully, we're in a really cool vibe place, right? Golf's becoming more of that vibe, cooler, less stuffy. It's becoming more inclusive versus exclusive like it's always been. And I think for kids getting into it, that's what I would encourage anyone to do. Have fun with it, get them clubs that they're not that expensive, that are weighted right, and let them just go experiment and have a good time. And I think the more time they spend with you, they'll enjoy it. And I think that's the fun part about golf, is being in a group together and the social aspect of it, which is fun. Make sure they, get out there and walk around, have a good time.
Yeah, we hear, you guys look around, we've got a dartboard, a mini ramp, we've got a skee ball that's converted to a putting, it's a putt ski. If they're getting bored hitting balls on the simulator, we're just like, let's go throw darts.
Yeah,
let's play ping pong. Let's skate if you want, play golf ski. Alex, one of our coaches, he finishes every lesson with golf ski. And he writes it down, what'd you get last week? Let's try to beat that score this week. And they're learning there, man. Even though the thing's 6 inches up above them and they're using, if they're hitting the sweet spot, if they're throwing a dart at a target, it's all learning. And so, yeah, just keeping it fun. And about the one thing I'm really glad to hear you guys say this, because I coach a little bit unconventionally. I think when it comes from a parent's perspective, I never tell a kid, to put their hands a certain place. And that's the one thing parents will often tell us. They'll be like, hey, you never taught my kid the grip. And I'm like, well, if I do, he's going to be miserable, because that doesn't feel good to him. He's going to whiff. Let him figure it out. And someday,
yeah,
it'll get there. It might get there on its own, and if it doesn't, we'll fix it. But don't get in there and start moving around and making them really uncomfortable, because they're just going to want to get out of here as soon as possible.
Claude, Sam, Mark, thanks for coming on talking about golf. It was great to learn about data, how athletes think on the course and improve, because I think there's a big transition of taking it from the range to the course, and really learned a lot tonight.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.